cognitive unconscious. That is, there are cognitions, states of knowledge and belief, like memory and perception, that affect our ongoing behavior in the absence of conscious awareness of what those pieces of knowledge or belief are. But as I pointed out, and I think in the very first lecture of this course, or maybe it was the second lecture, there's more to what's going on in the mind than just the cognition. Conscious mental life consists of more than states of knowing or believing. And so we want to ask the question of whether unconscious mental life also extends beyond cognition to other sorts of mental states. What sorts of mental states are we talking about? Well, the ones that Kant talked about in that famous quote of his. There are three irreducible faculties of mind: knowledge, feeling, and desire, what's come to be called the trilogy of mind. So far in this series of lectures, I've been talking about states of knowledge, perception, memory, thinking, ideas, language, whatever. Now, let's ask about the other two elements of the trilogy of mind. Let's move from unconscious cognition, which has to do with unconscious knowledge and beliefs influencing behavior, and see what evidence there might be for unconscious motivation and unconscious emotion influencing behavior. And again, we're treading in areas where the research is not quite settled yet. But I want to talk about this because the claim about unconscious emotion has gotten a tremendous amount of attention lately, both in the professional literature and in the popular press, and I have some warnings to issue about it. Okay, so let's first talk about one aspect of unconscious emotion and unconscious motivation, and that is the relationship between emotion and motivation on the one hand and automatic processing on the other. It seems quite likely, okay, that motivational states and emotional states can be unconsciously activated, can be automatically activated by the presence in the environment of various kinds of eliciting stimuli, in the same way that unconscious beliefs and unconscious knowledge might be. We saw an example of this early on when I talked briefly about John Barge's automotive model, where he argued that it's not just ideas that can be primed, but it's motives and goals that can be primed as well. You also saw an example of it in this more recent discussion of subliminal affective priming. The affective prime is unconscious, right? But you're processing it anyway. The only way you can process a masked prime is by virtue of automatic processing, okay? You can't consciously process something that you're not conscious of. It's just a logical fact there. So in both of these cases, though, the emotional or motivational state is itself conscious. In Barge's automotive model, the person's conscious of his goal. He just doesn't know why he's got that goal. In Greenwald's work on affective priming, the person is quick to say, yes, that's a negatively toned word, but he doesn't really know why he's been so quick to make that judgment. And there are lots of cases, just kind of walking around, where we have a motivational state or an emotional state, and we don't quite know why we have it. There's an old piece of verse that some of you will be familiar with that expresses this really nicely. I do not love thee, Dr. Fell. Why that is, I cannot tell. I only know I do not love thee, Dr. Fell. The poet knows what his affective state is, but he doesn't know why he has it, okay? That's this kind of automatic elicitation of affect. In this case, the state is consciously accessible. I only know I do not love thee, Dr. Fell, but the process that led up to that state is unconscious, which is why he does not, why he cannot tell. The question before us now is, can motivational and emotional states themselves be conscious? Can we have feelings that we're not aware of that still affect our behavior? Can we have motives that we're not aware of that still affect our behavior? One person who made this claim about motivation is the late David McClelland, prominent personality psychologist, longtime professor at Harvard, who made a distinction between explicit and implicit motivation. Explicit motives are the kinds of motives we can talk about and discuss and claim for ourselves on various kinds of personality questionnaires. They are conscious drives or needs or goals that affect our behavior. And McClelland's long-standing research program was studying the effects of what he called the three great social motives: the need for achievement, the need for affiliation, and the need for power. But there are lots of other motives that you could study this way. But those conscious motives are to be distinguished, in his view, from what he called implicit motives, which we can define in parallel with implicit memory as any effect of a drive or a need or a goal that influences the person's behavior in the absence of conscious awareness of that motive. Okay, that's exactly parallel to our definition of implicit memory. And McClelland claimed that we had these unconscious or implicit motives, and that they did drive, direct, and select our behavior in various ways, even though we were not necessarily aware of them. And as evidence for this, he pointed out the discrepancies between the results of two different ways of assessing motivation. The way personality psychologists usually assess motivation is by asking people to report on their motives by means of things like self-report personality questionnaires. One prominent assessment is known as the personality research form, but there are lots of these around. It's just a questionnaire like the ones you took when you were doing RPP experiments in Psych 1, and it simply asks people to talk about their needs and goals and drives. So, for example, on the achievement motivation subscale of the personality research form are questions like, I enjoy doing things which challenge me. I will keep working on a problem after others have given up. And I often set goals that are very difficult to reach. People who endorse statements like that are people who are classified as high in achievement motivation. And that's one way to assess achievement motivation. But notice that it depends on people's conscious awareness of what their motives are. McClelland said, let's try something else. Well, McClelland didn't invent this method. That was Henry Murray's work. But he did perfect it in a way, but using a technique called the thematic apperception test, or sometimes called the picture story exercise. Here, the subject is presented with a picture and is asked to tell a story about what's going on in the picture. A story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the idea behind this is that subjects will unconsciously project their own motives onto the action in the picture. So, for example, this is one of them, and you can imagine one subject saying, this person is taking a physical ed test, and he's being made to climb this rope, and he's not very strong, and he's afraid of heights, and he just really hates this thing, and he's afraid he's going to fall. A lot of fear, okay? Or a subject might say, this is Lars Wallenda of the Flying Wallendas, the greatest acrobatic troupe in Europe. He's performing a command performance before the Queen of England, and he's going to do a double flip half, whatever it is, and the crowd is going to go wild. The one story is a story full of fear. The other story is a story full of achievement motivation. McClelland argued that by use of this picture story exercise, that would reveal people's unconscious motives that even they weren't aware of, and that still drove and directed and selected their behavior. Here's another picture. This is, and again, you can say this is a kid who's being made to practice his violin. He'd really rather be out playing soccer, or field hockey or something like that. The kind of a depressing little story. Or you can say, this is Yehudi Menuhin. He's about to play a command performance at the White House, and he's thinking about the Brahms violin concerto or whatever it is. In fact, that is a picture of Yehudi Menuhin. Okay? But again, one picture or the one story is full of achievement imagery and the other one is not. That's kind of how this works. When you compare motive assessments by the two methods, by personality questionnaires in which people are asked to self-report on their motives, and motive assessments based on the thematic apperception test, what you discover is that the correlations between those two assessments are incredibly low. They are almost as close to zero as you can get. Remember, correlations go from -1 through 0 to +1. These correlations is a meta-analysis by two German investigators for the three great social motives. All of them are piddling small. And on the basis of this kind of evidence, McClelland and others have claimed that there are implicit motives, people have unconscious motives that are not necessarily the same as their conscious motives. We can reveal these through exercises like the thematic apperception test and study their effects on behavior. Okay? So that's the claim. And it's not a bad claim. Okay? McClelland and I were colleagues for 5 years. He's a wonderful scientist. But there are some problems with this claim, which is that just a simple lack of correlation does not really provide convincing evidence of a dissociation between explicit conscious and implicit unconscious motives. For one thing, there are lots of reasons why two variables might be poorly correlated with each other. One is simply method variance. We know from a century's worth of research on personality questionnaires that personality questionnaires do a relatively poor job of predicting actual behavior. Okay? We psychologists, we love these questionnaires, but most of them are not that good. Okay? So the fact that there's a low correlation just might mean that the self-report measure doesn't predict actual behavior. Not that subjects are unconscious of their motives. Or it might be that despite the fact that the two tests have the same name, they're both classified as tests of achievement motivation or whatever, they might actually be measuring two different personality constructs. So the simple lack of a correlation is not enough to convince us that conscious and unconscious motives can be dissociated. Okay, so that's all I want to say about unconscious motives, just to kind of lay the foundation for the idea that we might have unconscious emotions, unconscious feelings, unconscious affects that influence our behavior as well. We know that emotion can be a reflection of implicit memory or implicit perception. We saw that in the Greenwald experiment and in other places. But again, can we have unconscious emotions, emotional states that we're not consciously aware of? Some psychologists have rejected this idea out of hand, saying that emotions, by definition, are